Today's session is called Enabling Secure Identity-Based Access for Remote Mac Workers. My name is Mike Vandelander. I am a product manager here at Jamf. I work specifically on the Jamf Connect and Unlock products, so don't be surprised if today's session is primarily focused on utilizing those tools to help with some of these questions around enabling your users. We're going to start today's session with just a brief overview of Jamf and the solutions that we offer, but I want to talk specifically to how we're able to enable you and your users to gaining access to their Macs when you're not necessarily back in the office, working remotely, and some of those challenges. So talking about being able to provision new user accounts on net new devices, trying to determine as users get themselves set up on a Mac, what types of permissions do they have locally, and what passwords are they actually using, credentials are being used to access resources on that Mac. We want to talk about how integrating with a cloud identity provider can make a lot of these questions easier, particularly when integrating with Jamf Connect as a product, and then also want to look at other examples of passwordless workflows in those situations where maybe users tend to forget their passwords, and we would just make it a lot easier if people could sign into their Macs without having to use a password. So getting started, for those of you who are new to Jamf, just a quick overview of who we are. And at Jamf, our mission is helping organizations succeed with Apple. We offer an Apple Enterprise Management solution, and we want to help organizations connect, manage, and protect their Apple devices. So again, today's webinar is about diving into some of those challenges that organizations in the enterprise can face when it comes specifically to securely connecting users to necessary resources. And we're going to discuss some of those solutions to any and all those challenges with a combination of Jamf's enterprise-focused products. Today, Jamf helps more than 50,000 organizations manage over 20 million of their Apple devices. And so when the enterprise needs a world leader in Apple management, they turn to Jamf. The world's largest banks, tech companies, the most valuable brands, and the largest companies choose Jamf for Apple management. And a very good reason for that is that at Jamf, we have an exclusive focus on Apple, and we have a history of providing same-day support for their new operating systems and services. This year was no exception, as Apple released macOS 12, iOS, iPadOS, and tvOS 15, and our commitment to same-day support ensures that end users and organizations can take advantage of new Apple capabilities the moment that they're available. And with new software, sometimes comes new hardware, new devices that are procured and sent to our offices, or what is probably more likely these days, sent directly to the homes of our coworkers. There's going to be a number of challenges in drop shipping new Macs into the hands of a new employee and trusting that their device is going to be configured and ready to go from the very moment that you hear that first startup chime. Now, I think there are probably a few basic tenets in any deployment that an organization should consider and have a part of their environment before they're trying to necessarily drop ship computers to everyone. And that is really where Jamf started, is with our management platform and in the enterprise, specifically Jamf Pro, where Jamf Pro acts as a management platform for all of your Apple devices. Going through the configuration of Jamf Pro, you're going to be linking your management service with Apple and Apple's Business Manager or Apple School Manager as a way to inform Jamf Pro of those new devices as they are being turned on for the very first time. So with that registration, each time a employee sets up a new computer, when it turns on and connects to any network, could be their home network, could be in the office, could be in a cafe somewhere. That device is registered to your organization because of the setup that's already been done, and the devices can be redirected to your Jamf Pro server to go through the initial enrollment process. But because we have control over what that Mac is doing from first boot, we then get to decide what the user experience is going to be like on the other side for our coworkers. So at least we know that we are able to manage the setup of the Mac. The other side of it is being able to help our end users go through the configuration, but also get access to the basic applications that they're going to need on their very first day of work. You could expect that maybe there is a team meeting that they need to join. So they would need to have access to applications like WebEx or Zoom. They need to be able to communicate with their team members. So they're going to be using Teams or Slack. The very first thing probably most people think about is getting access to their email. So which email client are they using? Is the email client set up for them to be able to sign into their account? Do they just do it through a web browser? And then ultimately, all of these are different services that you would need to sign into for the very first time. So what is your username? What's your email address? What's the password that you need to be able to use? Does an account, when you go to sign in for the first time, require that you set up security questions? Do you have to reset your password? Do you have to set up different factors for multi-factor challenges? There's a lot of things that happen in those first 30 minutes of being a new employee. And the more that you can do to reduce, any sort of friction, and make that whole onboarding experience as simple and enjoyable as possible, is just going to ultimately help that individual be productive, from the very first boot. So circling back to what those first 20, 30 minutes of setup look like, you've turned on your computer, you've connected it to your home network, you are getting the device enrolled into your MDM service like Jamf Pro. But there's a lot of questions about what that initial setup experience should be like on the Mac. The Mac has a lot of questions. It's going to be asking the user about a number of different privacy questions. You, as an organization or an administrator, have influence of what that setup experience is like. That's all done through, say Jamf Pro and your pre-stage enrollment. So you're able to suppress any questions that aren't necessary. Say if you don't need people signing in with their personal Apple IDs, you're able to remove that as one of those initial setup questions. But even still, once the end user is at their desktop, who are they? What account have they created on that Mac? Do you even know that the person that has set up that Mac is the one that was intended to set up the Mac, right? We're drop shipping computers around the world, and you're just trusting that on the other end somebody is, at home when the Mac arrives at their doorstep, and they're the ones that open up the box and go through the initial setup. If this is an automated enrollment process, how do you know that the person on that keyboard is the one that's meant to be reading the company newsletter or whatever else is automatically pushed and made available to that Mac as a part of the enrollment process? So there's a number of ways that you're able to bring in the concept of identity during the enrollment process to, again, set up that trust that the right person is gaining access to the computer, that when that person has set up the Mac and signed into their account for the first time, that their local permissions on that computer are correct. You may not want everybody to be a local administrator. You might want to only allow certain individuals to be administrators, or you may want to standardize or set the default to everybody being a standard user. How do you do that without necessarily knowing ahead of time which user is signing in to that Mac? And this all circles back around to the idea of using identity and cloud-based identity providers. there's been solutions like this in the past when everybody worked within the same four walls and we had access to some sort of a directory service that was on premises, and it listed all the users, all their group memberships. It even was able to manage their password. But that idea, I mean, that's been going away for a while now, but certainly in the last 2 years, it's been almost impossible to rely on users connecting back to an on-premises domain and directory service to let the Mac be informed about that particular user's permissions and attributes. So the need for adopting a cloud identity provider has just, grown enormously within the last few years. But if you have a cloud-based management service for your Macs and you have a cloud-based management service for your identities, we can bring those two together on the Mac to enable this entire account provisioning process and ensure that the end user, again, who is setting up the Mac is the right person with the right permissions and ultimately with the right credentials on an ongoing basis to just help make that entire login process that much more smooth and keep those users productive on a daily basis. So today, let's talk about how Jamf Connect, in conjunction with a management system like Jamf Pro, can be used to help solve any and all of these challenges. Connect is our solution exclusively built to streamline the provisioning process and provide a form of authentication and identity management on the Mac, with the idea of giving our end users the power to leverage that single corporate identity to gain access on any of their Apple devices to the resources that they need to be productive. Connect itself is not a single sign-on product. It integrates with those systems that we feel that you have already brought into your environment. As an enterprise organization, you've likely already adopted these systems so that your users can easily sign into, their web services like Slack, Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, Office 365. Those are systems you already have in place. And if you're a Jamf Pro customer, you may already have those systems integrated into your management system to allow for, again, easier provisioning, allowing for your administrators to be able to sign into the web console more easily. It's this concept of single sign-on where end users have a single set of credentials. They're able to sign into a portal or reuse those credentials to get into a variety, if not all, of the systems that you need on a daily basis. It's on the single sign-on provider to validate the identity of the user, challenge them for multi-factor responses, and then also manage the password. But to the end user, it's simple, right? You really just need to know the one username, your email address more likely than anything, and then your password plus whatever your multi-factor, challenge is going to be. It could be a push notification to your phone. It could be a security key. It could be a one-time password. I mean, there's a number of different options there. But Connect as a product then is meant to integrate with the Mac and bring the concept of identity to the Mac so that the Mac and those user accounts on the Macs in your environment can participate in that single sign-on system. So when we look at Jamf Connect as a product, as a platform, it really provides now four main features that you would be able to take advantage of, starting with provisioning. And provisioning is that idea that bootstrapping yourself into a user account on the Mac should be as simple as knowing what your single sign-on provider's username and password is, and having the ability to walk the user through that initial setup to create the local user account on the Mac with the correct local permissions. If the user needs to go through any sort of a password reset because it's their first time signing in, if they need to go through that multi-factor registration process, that we have the ability to do that and make sure that the account that's created on the Mac is right from the very start. And with identity management, that local user account contains the attributes that we need to know about the user. Again, what groups are they a member of? What position are they in within the company? What role do they play? What teams are they a member of? What geographic location are they in? And if that information actually helps, customize the setup for them, right? Make that whole setup experience enjoyable. If there's anything that we can tell the Mac as a part of that onboarding and provisioning process that could be gained by just knowing the identity of the end user who's tapping in their name through the keyboard, then we can inform the Mac, Jamf Connect, Jamf Pro to apply the correct configurations and, again, personalize that experience for that user, but then keep it up to date, right? If membership changes and you need to just inform the Mac and continue to personalize the journey and the experience for your end user, that being tied to that identity provider is going to continuously inform what the experience is like on that Mac. And the easiest example of that is password synchronization, so that the user has that single set of credentials to get into their various systems. And the fourth item that I'll add to the list is a relatively new workflow that we've introduced to Jamf Connect, and that is Jamf Unlock. And Unlock is an application that we created for iOS and iPadOS that allows a user to, again, sign into their identity provider on that mobile device, pair that mobile device with their Mac, and in instances where the user needs to be able to authenticate to the Mac, by just presenting and responding to the notification on that device, that user is then allowed to authenticate and sign in to that Mac without ever having to type in a password. So I'll get into that a little bit more here a bit later. So let's think about account provisioning. Again, today out of the box, if somebody were to set up their own personal Mac, they're going to be asked to just create a simple local user account. Choose your own name, choose a password. Nothing too complicated, but it's not tied to anything, right? It is its own entity. It's its own name, has its own permissions. There's nothing really managing that. Step into the enterprise world and you have a management system like Jamf Pro in place, and you get to inform what those accounts are like. You can use your pre-stage enrollments to determine that any and all Macs that go through that particular enrollment process get a standard account, or they get an admin account, or we're going to create a secondary service account specifically for admins that has a static username and password, right? It's kind of the same provisioning process for all computers, but you still don't have a whole lot of influence over what the username and password is. You can certainly gate the provisioning process through customized enrollment and require a user to sign in through a single sign-on provider just as a gate check. But again, you're not really getting information from that enrollment process to inform what the actual user account information is. And that's where Connect starts to play, right? We're able to use Jamf Pro and customize enrollment and your single sign-on provider married with Jamf Connect. And as the user is going through that setup process and they're asked to sign into your identity provider, that the information about the user is passed down to the system, and Jamf Connect is able to create that user account from scratch using the information about the person from the identity provider. So we know that the account as it's created on the Mac is created with the correct name. You know who it is that went through the enrollment process because they're only able to sign in if they knew the credentials and were able to get through the challenges of authentication. And then we have the pieces in place to be able to synchronize the password on the Mac to match the password for the identity provider. Again, circling back to single sign-on. We want to make it as easy as possible for our end users to be able to get into the systems they need. They have a single set of credentials through their single sign-on provider. Let the Mac participate. Jamf Connect can make it so that the password that the user needs to know to unlock their Mac, if it's file vault encrypted at boot, to sign into their system, to unlock their keychain, to install software updates. Anywhere on the Mac that there is going to be a request for a password, that the user really just needs to know the password for their identity provider, and that same password can be used across the system. And for the users, it's simple enough to get their accounts created and set up on their Mac. And for the organization, you know that the people setting up the computers are the right individuals. And you have reporting then to show exactly who is signed into each of those Macs, and you can rely on there being a universal standard of how user accounts are then named on those computers. With identity management, we again are authenticating the user to our cloud identity provider. We're using information that we've already determined about the user to say they are in a particular role or a member of a particular team that then is going to determine if they are a local administrator on their Mac or not. And because we are requiring or could require the end user to sign into their identity provider both at account provisioning or on continuous restarts and boot attempts, by signing into that identity provider, we get records then for that authentication process in the identity provider's logging system. So you would always be able to know when and where somebody had signed into a Mac inside of your fleet. Because that sign-in process is gated by the IDP, you're able to enforce your password policies across the board, right? So if you wanted to have specific password policies for your cloud identity credentials, well, the Mac is just going to inherit those same password policies because we are keeping the local password on the Mac in sync with that cloud identity provider password. And with the ability to provision new user accounts, just in time, right, from that login window, you can sign in with the credentials of any user that should be allowed to sign into a Mac. That means that IT or your help desk wouldn't necessarily have to create service accounts with static credentials. If one member of your help team needed to get into a Mac to perform some sort of a task, then from the login window, they could just sign in using their service credentials or their credentials for the identity provider. That would create the local user account for that help desk team member with the permissions that they need to then perform the services needed, and then never have to know the end user's credentials, the person who the device is assigned to, nor would you have to have static credentials for each of these devices across your entire fleet. And again, to the idea of password synchronization, if you want the user experience for your end user to be as simple as possible and reduce the likelihood that they would have to reset a password because it's been forgotten, well, we're just going to use the password for the cloud identity provider for the user account on the Mac. So when they boot the Mac, to get through File Vault, to log into their account, to again install software updates, it's the same password that they use to get into their email system. But with that synchronization in place, if the password expires after a certain period of time, if somebody does reset their IDP password from another device, that we have a mechanism in place to continuously keep the local password in sync. So even if the password changes elsewhere or over time, that the Mac continues to participate in this idea of single sign-on so that, again, you have the same password get into your Mac as you do for the rest of your systems. So then the question of how do we do this? How do we get the information about this individual from the identity provider onto the Mac? And Jamf Connect is that glue that makes it possible, but Jamf Connect works in this ecosystem between your MDM, Jamf Pro, and whatever your cloud identity provider is. So Connect as a product does support a specific list of cloud identity providers. That includes Microsoft, primarily Azure AD, though you could also use ADFS if that's your system, Okta, Google Cloud Identity and Google Workspace, IBM Security Verify, Ping Federate, as well as OneLogin. With each of these identity providers, they have their own form of integration, but it's going to be a familiar interface for your end users. If you need to be able to get into your Mac, you would sign into your Mac the same as if you were trying to sign into your email, that there's going to be a web view like you were in a browser. You're going to go through an interactive login like you're signing into, again, your email or Slack or Zoom, and go through the username, password, and multi-factor challenges to then either create an account on the Mac or just sign into an existing account. And so from there, I just want to go through a demo. I'll show you what the interactive login is like for each of these identity providers, and we'll just talk through the process of what's happening as I'm creating these accounts just in time. Okay, so we're going to live in the world of a VM here, just so I'm able to actually demonstrate what it's like logging in and out of an account. Don't want to do that when you're trying to record a video on your otherwise presenter Mac because you're going to lose the recording very quickly. So I'm on my Mac. This is let's say a Mac that's enrolled into Jamf Pro. We have Jamf Connect installed on our device. But I already have signed into an account, obviously. So let's just go back to a login window and sign into a new account for the first time. What I've done is I've locally installed configuration profiles for Jamf Connect that tell Connect how to behave and how to integrate with our different identity providers. So in this case, I have Okta as an identity provider. So let's sign out and sign in using that account. So for a login window, nothing too crazy. We just have simple username, password fields that allow the user to put in the credentials for their Okta account. If they needed to change their password, register security questions or anything as a part of that initial sign-in, maybe they have a temporary password, then we have the ability to present a web view to walk the user through that flow. But otherwise, if it's just standard sign-in, then put in the credentials. And then we log you in. Okay, so a little movie magic here, and I've reset our login window. I'm going to be signing in now using Google as our cloud identity provider instead of Okta. And the first thing you may notice is we have a different interface. There's some differences in the integrations, again, between the different identity providers. There's more details about that on the website, and you can talk to a systems engineer or look at documentation to know kind of more about what those integrations are. But the important thing to point out is that when it comes to Google, Azure, and other identity providers other than Okta, we're able to present a web view. And so it should be that familiar user experience again for your end users. So I'm going to sign in again with the same account. Now I've actually deleted this account since the first time we signed in, again, thanks to the movie magic. So I will enter my credentials. And now that we've authenticated successfully against Google, I'm going to have a new user account created on my Mac. Now, just like signing in with a brand new user account on any Mac, we have the setup assistant that's just going to ask us a few questions. If I had my configurations in place from Jamf Pro, I could skip any and all these questions that I'm not interested in providing to the user. I'll just manually skip through them right now. And this is great. Now I'm signed into a brand new user account on my Mac. I did so using my Google credentials. And the best part about this is my account for my Mac user account is the same as my Google account, full name, username, and the password to sign into this account is, again, the same as what I would use to sign into Google. So from there, we've provisioned ourselves a brand new administrator account, username, passwords, match. That's a great Google experience. And it's something that's actually relatively new to Connect. If you've looked at our product in the past, this is something that's new as of version 2.5, which came out in October of 2021 here, where we have that ability to set the local user account and password to specifically match Google. In the past, we could do the authentication piece, but now we actually have the password piece as well. So let me reset, and we'll do this one more time for Microsoft Azure AD. So we're back at our login window, and because I've changed the configuration that Connect is using, we now have our Microsoft login page. I have the same account, same credentials that are able to be used with Microsoft as an identity provider. So let's just go through that same sign-in one more time, but using Microsoft now instead. In this case, our Microsoft AD tenant is federated through to an ADFS instance. Hit sign in. And now we're logging into our local user account and creating that user account. And again, if you have looked at Connect in the past, or have used and familiar with the way that Connect has integrated with Azure AD as an identity provider, similar to Google and the way that we're able to use passwords now. What's different with Connect now, again, now because of version 2.6, which is our most recent update here from November, we have the ability to use the password from the web view to create the local user account that the user is never prompted a second time to enter a password. Now, if you have File Vault on your Macs and your disks are encrypted, you would still have to enter a local password to unlock the disk, but to get through the login sequence and into your local user account or to create a local user account, we only ever ask for the password that one time in the web view. There is no secondary password prompt anymore. So that would be 3 different demos, one for Okta, one for Google, and the new changes with the password and account provisioning there. And then finally with Microsoft Azure AD, how we are able to, again, sign you in with just that initial authentication request and no additional password requests. Once you're actually signed into your user account on the Mac, we do have the Jamf Connect application that's going to continuously run in the menu bar, and it performs a few different functions for us, but primarily it's going to be a way for you to be able to sign into your cloud identity provider. So in the case of Okta, it'll actually sign you directly into your Okta portal. The password and the credentials for your user account are saved to the keychain for that individual. And then on an ongoing basis, our application can do a background validation of those password credentials against the identity provider so that we have that continuous check. So if you do end up changing your password off the box, through the website on another device, when the identity password changes, that the Mac is more or less informed of that, and Connect has the ability then to remediate those password changes. So if I go, So in this case, if I sign in with a different user account that I know has different credentials, ooh. So if I go to sign into a user account that I know has different credentials, that's going to do a check against the local password, and we're going to get a notification that the local password is no longer in sync with our identity provider password. So it gives me an opportunity to enter the current local password so that everything can be updated. And in that way, there's continuity of service there that maintains the local login keychain as well as the file vault password without really causing any issues on reboot for the user. So that's just not to go too deep into the details of all the different features and functionality of the menu bar application itself. We will talk about one other thing here, unlock, in a second, but it is there primarily as a way to both sign you into your identity provider and then, again, keep that local password in sync should it change elsewhere. It also has the ability with certain integrations to notify the user ahead of time if a password is set to expire. So if you have your password set to rotate on a calendar basis every 60, 90, 120 days, anything like that, there are, with some identity providers, a way to inform the user again that the password is going to be required to change in the next 7 or 14 days, and start giving them that alert ahead of time so that they don't run into a situation where they necessarily need to reset the password, that they could be proactive about it, change the password in their own time prior to it actually expiring, and again, providing that continuity of service. So that was just more or less a brief demo of being able to log in and provision user accounts using cloud identity providers, being able to continuously authenticate that user against that cloud identity provider using our menu bar application. It's all bundled in as one Connect application you're able to deploy and manage through your MDM service or specifically through Jamf Pro. A couple of those new features having to do with the Google account provisioning and pass-through authentication, where we're able to use that same username and password for your Google ID as your local account. That's something that was introduced in Jamf Connect 2.5. And then with Microsoft, and again, just being able to use that same password again to create that local user account without having to ask the user to enter that password several times, that's a new feature as of Jamf Connect 2.6. Now, we do have a few other planned enhancements around other identity providers similar to those workflows that are going to be available hopefully in the near future. If you aren't using necessarily Azure or Google, but you're interested in that type of functionality, I would encourage you to sign up for the Jamf Connect betas, and that's typically available to Jamf customers by simply signing into your account at account.jamf.com and look for the product feedback section. We're able to then get involved in providing feedback for those upcoming feature releases. Now, a lot of what we've been focusing on has to do with generating these user accounts and relying on the credentials for those user accounts, namely the passwords. And today, the number one security issue that organizations and our customers face is really stolen credentials. 80% of data breaches involve stolen or weak passwords, but less than 10% of an organization's budget is typically spent on eliminating the security risks associated with passwords. So security teams and admins try to combat this threat by implementing password policies with strong passwords, but strong passwords can be difficult to remember, or they just simply cause friction because with passwords being reused for different resources, end users could inadvertently expose their password to a phishing attack. And so we think that it's important for organizations to think about how to best handle the use of passwords going forward. Research shows that by 2022, 60% of large and global enterprises and some 90% of mid-sized enterprises are going to be implementing passwordless methods for gaining access to various resources. And it was for that reason that we introduced Jamf Unlock as a new workflow inside of Jamf Connect. So for organizations that are wanting to deliver a passwordless experience for their users, and they want that to be how somebody could, say, gain access to their Mac, implementing Jamf Connect using Jamf Unlock as an iOS app. By implementing Jamf Unlock, end users have an application that's installed from a trusted source like Jamf Pro. They are asked to go through an authentication challenge through their identity provider, just like Jamf Connect has been showing, but on their iOS device. We provide the mechanism of pairing their iPhone or iPad with the Mac, and then the certificates that are created for the user are tied to the user account on the Mac. So every subsequent request for that user to authenticate as themselves to the computer will actually be deferred to the phone. The user receives a notification, they tap the notification, they are already authenticated to their identity on the device, but we can use biometrics like Face ID or Touch ID to then, in the moment, prove that it is them who is holding and using the device, and the phone is what is used to unlock the use of the certificate to actually sign the user into the Mac. So for that, I've got a brief demo just to kind of show what that pairing process is like and what those subsequent unlock requests are also like. So beginning here, we have both Connect on a Mac as well as Unlock on a phone. The phone is kind of positioned on the right-hand side there. And Connect on the Mac has a menu for allowing to pair brand new devices, and that's the window that's showed over on the left-hand side. So we launch the app on the phone, we tap Get Started. The app on the phone is already configured to talk to the identity provider for our organization. In this case, it's Okta. When that web view is presented, I would just sign in using my Okta credentials or any identity provider credentials as I would signing in through Connect. And once I am then signed in locally, that's when the magic happens with Unlock, generating the pairing certificate and request on the phone side. So we're able to validate, again, that it is the specific user who is signed into the phone. We ask that when that certificate is created on the phone, that we go through a biometric unlock process to prove that that user is who's going to be using the device moving forward. And then we are able to use Connect on the Mac to display QR code, the camera, and Unlock on the phone to scan the QR code. And that is what pairs Unlock on the phone to Connect on the Mac. So a little bit of gluing here as you type in your administrator password to go through the initial setup process. But at that point forward, there is an established Bluetooth connection between the Mac and the phone. The user would then go through, accept the ability to provide notifications to the phone, and that's what's going to give us the ability to beacon to the phone when the Mac is ready to authenticate. On the Mac, you would go to a different place, as an example, to start the authentication request, like system preferences. If you go to dig into one of the preference panes, usually you're going to be asked to enter an administrator password in order to unlock that preference pane. But with Connect and Unlock enabled, we're actually going to behave as if we were a smart card. We're a virtual smart card to the system, and the user is instead only going to be prompted to enter the PIN to unlock the use of Unlock on the phone. Now that's something that can be configured. You don't have to use a PIN if you don't want to. If you have no PIN required, you just leave that blank. And once you hit OK, it beacons to the phone, asks for the user to authenticate to the phone by using biometrics like Face ID, and that is what unlocks the ability to sign in as that user. So other places on the system that somebody may try to sign in beyond system preferences, if you're trying to run different super user commands inside of terminal, if you're trying to install software, if you need to run any sort of an update, typical places that a user is going to be asked to authenticate as an administrator. Instead of being asked for the password again, you would get this PIN prompt, and by entering either the PIN that Unlock is displaying for the user, if it's required, and again, if no PIN is required, it would be left blank. That is what allows the end user to then beacon to the phone, unlock the app, use Face ID to prove that they are the ones who are using the phone, and that is what unlocks the use of their account on the Mac. So when it comes to Jamf Unlock, again, this is a workflow that's included inside of Jamf Connect. It's just meant to be an additional workflow to allow for passwordless authentication to the Mac itself. So it works, and again, in a number of different situations, like unlocking preference panes, trying to install software, most places that an administrator is going to be asked to authenticate to the device. It works when you're trying to unlock the Mac at sleep, and we have some other future enhancements in the planning as well. So being that it's something that's an application that's installed on the devices that you're managing, there are no additional hardware costs beyond the iOS and Mac devices you're already managing. There's no external fobs or security keys. It's all part of your existing deployment. The ability to authenticate to the device is still tied to the cloud identity provider. So to go through the whole pairing process, you have to successfully authenticate to your cloud identity provider, go through the multi-factor challenges, everything like that. But this then allows for multi-factor authentication to the Mac. And because this is all done locally with multi-peer connectivity between the phone and the Mac, this also can all work offline. There's no network or larger internet connection required to be able to use your phone to unlock your computer. So to recap, the things that we spoke about in today's webinar, really we're just trying to look at that user account provisioning story. What does it take to get the Mac out of the box and for your end user and employee to be productive as soon as possible? What items do they need to know to go through the setup process? How can you make that easier for your end user by providing them an ability to sign into their Mac using the credentials that they'd already know to get into email and their other systems? And then what kind of security does that bring and peace of mind does it bring to your team, knowing that the end users getting into their drop-shipped Macs are the intended individuals, and that once that individual has access to the computer, that they are provisioned with the correct permissions, that they're a local administrator or standard user. Once that user account is created, then the password that's used to gate access to that Mac through FileVault and authenticating to the device itself is a password that's maintained and kept in sync with your identity provider, meaning that password complies with all the policies that you have configured for that same password to be used across all the rest of the services used within your organization. And then finally, how can you look beyond the password, start adopting passwordless workflows inside of your environment by adopting Connect and using Unlock and using biometrics, Face ID, Touch ID on your phone to then gate access to the Mac by confirming somebody's identity by using an external device. A few additional resources for you to be aware of past today's session.
Jamf offers a number of different pro services to help you get onboarded and these different services and systems integrated into your environment. We also offer training both in person and online, and certainly Jamf's support to help you get your devices configured and help you be successful with implementing and managing Apple devices within your environments. And finally, definitely if you haven't been involved or haven't had a chance to look, Jamf Nation, which is our community, over 100,000 Mac admins, where people are able to share their knowledge and expertise in deploying and managing Apple devices within their environment. And again, I want to thank you for attending and listening today. We'll let you know when the recording of today's session is available, and I hope that we were able to answer your questions during today's session. But certainly if you have more questions after the fact, do not hesitate to reach out to us. You can email directly at info@jamf.com, and we'll make sure to respond with those answers. Thank you so much. Take care.